The year was 1220, a season when spring brought not renewal, but ruin. On the desolate borders of ancient Khwarezmia, the air hung thick with dust and despair. A mother fell to her knees, her cries vanishing into the wind as Mongol soldiers dragged her 14-year-old daughter toward a column of trembling captives. The girl's name was Zaria. She didn't resist. She didn't beg. She had already grasped the cruelest law of conquest, that defiance only sharpens the blades of the merciless. Somewhere in a Mongol scribe's ledger, her name was already inked beside cold details. Her age, her height, even the outline of her body, recorded with the mechanical precision of an empire that had begun to treat human lives as inventory. What unfolded across the steppes wasn't chaos or savage impulse. It was method, a system of domination crafted to break nations through their women, one captive at a time. And here's something to think about. When an empire learns to turn human suffering into strategy, do you think it's the sword that conquers, or the silence that follows it? This was not merely the conquest of nations. It was the conquest of bloodlines. The female body, once sacred as the vessel of life, was being reshaped into a weapon of empire. Motherhood itself had become a political instrument. You won't find this story in the glorious chronicles written to immortalize the Mongols' victories. Those records speak of triumphs and rulers brought to their knees, but hidden between those lines lies another legacy. One etched not on parchment, but in blood. Centuries later, genetic studies would reveal what history tried to forget: the lasting biological footprint of a policy that turned reproduction into a form of conquest. For the true power of Genghis Khan was never just his military brilliance, it was the legacy he engineered. He built not only cities and armies, but lineages. His empire expanded through both steel and seed, through fire and flesh. To understand how such a system took root, we must travel back, before he was the great Khan, before his name inspired fear across continents, to when he was merely a poor boy named Temujin, born in 1162 on the harsh Mongolian steppe. His tribe was small, constantly hunted by rival clans, surviving only on what they could steal or scavenge. Life was a constant battle against hunger and cold. When Temujin was just 9, his father was poisoned by enemies. His mother, Holun, was left abandoned with her children, forced to survive in a land that showed no mercy. They ate roots and fish scraped from frozen rivers, gnawed on bark when there was nothing else to eat. From this brutal childhood, Temujin learned a truth that would shape his empire. The world was divided into two kinds of people, those who take and those who are taken. At 16, tragedy struck again. His betrothed, Borte, was kidnapped by a rival tribe. For months, Temujin searched for her, chasing rumors that grew darker each time. She had been violated, enslaved, forced into another man's bed. When he finally rescued her, Borte was pregnant. No one ever knew whose child she carried, Temujin's or her captor's. But in that moment, something inside him hardened. He realized that women were not merely the spoils of war, they were the architects of the future. And whoever controlled women controlled the destiny of nations. From that revelation, Temujin's strategy took on a chilling brilliance. While rival clans wasted away in grief, he observed those who endured, the women. They survived, they adapted, they gave birth. And their children carried not only their mother's blood, but the memory of their conquerors. Temujin saw this not as tragedy, but as opportunity. He understood that he could win not only through war, but through inheritance. If he could direct who bore the next generation, then the need for endless occupation would disappear. The conquered themselves would, generation by generation, become Mongol. His rule would not merely dominate the present, it would colonize the future. By 1206, when Temujin was crowned Genghis Khan, uniting all Mongol tribes beneath one banner, his system was already taking form. What his administrators would later call the permanent seating system was no theory, it was policy already in motion. Its first great trial came in 1209, during the Mongol campaign against the Tanguts. The Mongols did not descend upon cities as savage raiders, as their enemies expected. They came with precision, with scribes, officials, and physicians trained in the study of women's bodies. Weeks before the main army arrived, spies had already infiltrated the cities, conducting quiet surveys, marking families, recording lineages, and identifying which women would be taken. The empire of Genghis Khan was not built by accident. It was designed one birth at a time. How many women were there? What were their ages, their faces, their family lines? Every detail, down to the smallest mark of beauty or scar, was written onto scrolls with chilling precision. These were not records of victory or tribute. They were ledgers of human lives, the first industrial-scale documentation of systematic sexual enslavement in recorded history. When the Tangut cities finally fell, the Mongols divided the survivors with ruthless order. The men were executed or forced into labor, but the women, they were classified. Category 1. Girls and women aged 14 to 30, deemed prime for bearing children. Category 2. Those between 31 and 40, women proven fertile through prior births. Category 3. The young, the elderly, the frail, and the sick. The first two groups were branded with ink upon their wrists and sent into caravans that followed the advancing army. The third group simply disappeared. These caravans were unlike anything the medieval world had ever seen, rolling cages of human beings, not trade goods. Each section had a purpose. One for the newly captured, one for the pregnant, another for those who had just given birth. Women deemed incapable of producing more children were quietly removed, erased without ceremony. It was not only the cruelty that horrified, it was the organization behind it. Mongol physicians administered herbs to induce fertility, prescribed diets to increase conception rates, even performed primitive surgeries to repair damaged wombs. Women were reduced to living instruments, their worth measured in offspring per cycle. The empire tracked conception ratios, successful births, and child survival rates as though they were counting livestock. What makes it most disturbing is not only what was done, but how meticulously it was recorded. Every act of violation became an entry, every child a statistic. And this was only the beginning. As the Mongol Empire expanded, this brutal system expanded with it, spreading like a shadow across Central Asia and into China, Persia, and beyond. What began as an experiment in control evolved into a calculated re-engineering of entire populations. Each assault, each pregnancy, each birth was logged by imperial scribes who decided whether a child would be raised as Mongol or erased entirely. Identification numbers were tattooed on the wrists of women, encoding their origin, fertility record, and assessed value. From the moment of capture, a woman no longer had a name. She became a number, an entry in an empire that transformed flesh into data. Some tried to cling to fragments of themselves. A few whispered their true names to their newborns, hoping the sound would outlive them. Others carved scars into their own skin, primitive memorials that screamed, "I existed. I was more than this." But the machinery was merciless. Within a single generation, tens of thousands of women had been stripped of voice, identity, and memory, reduced to vessels for empire. By 1211, when Genghis Khan turned his gaze toward the mighty Jin dynasty, the system was no longer in its infancy, it was perfected. The Mongols did not merely conquer nations. They conquered wombs. Chinese chronicles from the campaign are almost unbearable to read. In Zhongdu alone, modern-day Beijing, over 40,000 women of childbearing age were seized. Across the empire, records mention caravans stretching for miles, each organized like a grotesque assembly line. The process was systematic. Capture, selection, acclimatization, a sanitized word for the cycle of violations that broke their resistance, followed by pregnancy, childbirth, and reassignment. Every birth brought judgment. Infants who bore enough Mongol features were taken, raised by Mongol families as part of a growing new order. Those who did not pass inspection were simply erased. Lives ended before they began. Even rebellion had its protocols. Women who starved themselves were force-fed until obedience returned. Those who tried to miscarry were bound and watched day and night. Some mutilated themselves to avoid pregnancy, and were kept alive only long enough to serve as living warnings. Mothers who smothered their newborns rather than see them raised by strangers faced public torment. Their defiance transformed into spectacle. Compassion was turned into a crime, mercy into terror. And through it all, the empire recorded, counted, catalogued every atrocity. The Mongols had achieved the unthinkable. They had transformed reproduction itself into a weapon of state. Through this, Genghis Khan achieved something far darker than simple conquest. Ordinary victory was never enough for him. He did not wish to rule cities that might one day rise from their ashes in rebellion. He wanted to seize the very lifeblood of those he defeated. Under his command, rape became statecraft, and motherhood itself was corrupted into an instrument of empire. Each pregnant captive in the caravans was no longer merely a prisoner. She had become a seed of domination, a vessel through which Genghis Khan planned to rewrite generations. Chinese and Persian archives still preserve haunting fragments of these horrors, records that chill the blood even centuries later. By the year 1220, over 200,000 women were counted within these caravans, stretching from the heart of Mongolia to the far reaches of Eastern Europe. Behind them stood an immense logistical network built for one purpose: to transport, control, and exploit. Along the routes stood inspection posts where women were examined like livestock, makeshift hospitals devoted to forced births, and sorting centers where the fate of every child was coldly decided. This was not the chaos of war. This was order designed, deliberate, and monstrous. The terror lay not just in the cruelty, but in the precision with which it was carried out. Genghis Khan had turned brutality into administration. His scribes recorded assaults with the same neat handwriting they used for inventories of cattle. His physicians experimented upon women's bodies with the same detached logic they applied to siege warfare. His governors calculated fertility rates with the same meticulous care they used to count silver, silk, and gold plundered from fallen cities. And yet, within this machinery of horror, there were flickers of defiance. The women resisted in ways that no official record could ever capture. They invented silent codes, a flick of the wrist, a subtle movement of the eyes, warning one another of escape attempts, hidden abortive practices, and secret poisons. Some mothers nursed their babies with tainted milk, choosing mercy through death rather than submission through life. Others learned to vomit after eating, starving themselves slowly so they would no longer be strong enough to carry a child to term. Some deliberately wounded themselves, infecting the cuts to invite fevers that would interrupt reproduction. But their most profound act of rebellion was not physical, it was emotional. Mothers whispered the names of children stolen from them, turning memory itself into a form of defiance. Through songs hummed under their breath, fragments of language carried across the silence of the night. They could not escape their suffering, but they tried to ensure that their culture, their identity, would survive beyond the chains. Still, the system adapted. By 1219, when Genghis Khan turned his fury toward the Khwarezmian Empire, this machinery of reproduction reached its most methodical stage. No longer improvising, the Mongols had perfected their process. They developed protocols for every form of resistance, every kind of city, every distinct culture. Their intelligence networks became more intricate, cataloging not only the women, but their families, talents, and emotional attachments. This information became a weapon, used to fracture bonds, to isolate captives, to break them without spilling blood. The Khwarezmian cities did not face an army alone. They faced an invisible system engineered to conquer bodies, souls, and bloodlines alike. What approached them was not just a force of war, but an empire of design, one that sought to erase identity itself. And the nightmare that followed would surpass every cruelty that came before. The Mongols did not march merely to plunder. They marched to harvest. In the cities of Bokhara, Samarkand, and Merv, women were torn from their families with chilling efficiency. The invaders had discovered a disturbing truth. When mothers were kept with their infants in the first weeks, they resisted less. But after 3 months, separating them broke something deep within, a spirit that could never be repaired. This machinery of subjugation grew even more calculated. Social class itself became a factor in the design. Noble women were not spared. They were given what the Mongols called special treatment, forced into the tents of high-ranking officers, surrounded by small comforts that only made their imprisonment feel colder. It was not mercy. It was manipulation. The Mongols observed that children born from noble mothers often inherited refined features, traits that could blend more easily into aristocracy. Peasant women, on the other hand, were processed in vast numbers, their worth measured not by lineage but by endurance. Their bodies were tested for how many pregnancies they could survive. Mongol physicians developed grotesque methods to make them more fertile, concoctions that could induce multiple ovulations, increasing the chance of twins or triplets. They monitored pregnancies with scientific detachment, modifying diets to reduce miscarriages and accelerate births. Every practice, every experiment, served one brutal purpose: to transform each captive into a productive unit of empire, a factory of future subjects. By 1220, this machinery had expanded beyond comprehension. Caravans of women stretched across the horizon like endless rivers of human despair, following behind Mongol armies. These were no ordinary prisoners. They were organized with military precision, divided into sections of capture, sorting, acclimatization, early pregnancy, late pregnancy, childbirth, postnatal recovery, and reassignment or disposal. Each segment was overseen by officials, healers, guards, and scribes, ensuring that not even a heartbeat within this system was left to chance. The caravans moved like living cities of despair, complete with their own dreadful infrastructure, wagons converted into crude field hospitals, tents arranged as prisons for every stage of pregnancy, and grim morgue carts used to discard the women who perished along the way. They followed the Mongol armies like a long, unending shadow that no one could ever outrun. What made this horror even more terrifying was not only its efficiency, but its permanence. A system so meticulously designed that its cruelty became timeless. Genghis Khan had grasped a truth that most conquerors never saw. Loot fades, kingdoms crumble, but blood endures. Pillage is fleeting, yet genetics can outlast empires. Every woman forced into those caravans was a vessel of future conquest. Every child born under that sky carried within them the genetic mark of submission and empire, and those children, in turn, would pass it onward. Victory, in this sense, became eternal. Modern science has confirmed this nightmarish legacy. Genetic studies have uncovered a chilling fact. Around 16 million men alive today are direct descendants of Genghis Khan and his immediate male lineage. That's roughly 1 in every 200 men across the globe. In Mongolia, that number soars even higher, close to 8%. In parts of Central Asia, the mark lingers around 3. Even in Eastern Europe, where the Mongol occupation was brief, their genetic fingerprints remain etched into the population. But these numbers only scratch the surface of the story. The machinery of reproduction and domination did not die with Genghis Khan. It expanded. His heirs refined the blueprint. His successor Ogdi Khan perfected the system during the European campaigns. Monk Khan applied it ruthlessly when the Mongols stormed the Abbasid Caliphate, while Kublai Khan, ruling over China, institutionalized it on a grander, colder scale. What began as a weapon of conquest had evolved into imperial doctrine, a dynastic tradition passed from one Mongol generation to the next. By the time Genghis Khan drew his last breath in 1227, during the Tangut campaign, caravans of captive women stretched across the spine of Eurasia. His death did not bring liberation. Instead, his descendants treated the entire apparatus as sacred inheritance. The women were divided among Mongol princes as hereditary property, their children raised as heirs of expansion. The system had become so deeply rooted in Mongol governance that it functioned like an instruction manual for empire. Even after his death, the shadow of Genghis Khan continued to devour lives. His funeral rites were said to include the live burial of 40 maidens, an offering of blood to accompany him into the afterlife. But that public display was only a fraction of the horror. The true funerary sacrifice was far greater. Thousands of caravan women were executed to prevent their escape during the uncertain transfer of power. Their bodies filled mass graves, buried by the same cold bureaucracy that had ruled their existence in life. Now, centuries later, the earth itself has begun to speak, and archaeologists are finally listening. Beneath the dust and ruin, they are uncovering the silent witnesses of empire. What they find confirms what the chronicles only hinted at: burial pits filled with young women, their remains separated from those of warriors. Their bones whisper stories of exhaustion, starvation, and wounds that never healed, the toll of endless marches across merciless lands. Among them, the smallest skeletons, infants and children, cast aside without care, denied even the simplest farewell that Mongol warriors gave their own dead. One excavation near the ancient city of Bokhara revealed something that stops the heart: the remains of a woman and a teenage girl, lying side by side as if in final embrace. DNA revealed what history never recorded: they were mother and daughter. But isotope analysis revealed an even more haunting truth: the mother was local, while the daughter had traveled hundreds of miles before her death. A silent testimony to the forced migrations that scarred entire generations. That grave, quiet for nearly 8 centuries, speaks louder than any written account. It takes us back to the beginning, to that moment every parent dreads: a mother watching her child dragged away, powerless to intervene. Across time and continents, the same tragedy repeats. Mothers and daughters torn from home, stripped of their names, erased from memory, reduced to numbers in the ledgers of conquest. And it forces us to confront an unbearable truth: the power of Genghis Khan did not die with him. It lived on through the bodies of women, through the children conceived in terror, through bloodlines scattered across continents. His empire was not just carved in stone, but etched into flesh, written in DNA that still walks among us today. If the story stirred something in you, don't let it fade. Share your thoughts below. What do you feel when you realize that the echoes of such horror still live within modern bloodlines? And if you want to uncover more truths buried beneath centuries of silence, subscribe to Vassal Truths, and join us as we journey deeper into the hidden corners of human history. Because some stories were never meant to vanish, and it's up to us to remember them, to give voice to the bones that still whisper beneath our feet.